Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's book talk presented by the Tenement Museum. We're joined by Thomas Hynes, author of Wild City, A Brief History of New York City and 40 Animals. The Tenement Museum has a lot of great virtual programming available on YouTube right now. We're very happy and excited to welcome Thomas here. And for those that are interested, the book is available from the Strand, and the link to purchase it will be in the chat. So Thomas Hynes is a writer who lives in Brooklyn with his wife, Veronica, and their dog, Ladybug. His work has been featured in Scientific American, Sierra Club, The All, Gothamist, Business Insider, McSweeney's Internet Tendency, and Untapped New York. Welcome, Thomas.
Thank you so much for having me. And it's such an honor to be with the Tenement Museum, even virtually. I'm such a huge fan of everything you do. So thank you so much for having me. I thought to get us started, I'd read the introduction to the book, and then maybe we could talk after that.
Wonderful.
Great. So I've always loved New York City, but I honestly never really thought too much about its wildlife. I knew there were parks, but I highly doubted there was much nature. Some rats and pigeons, sure, but not much else, nothing truly wild. After all, the concrete jungle is barely forgiving enough for human life, so surely this could be no place for the fragile intricacies of the natural world. For me, all that changed one summer afternoon when I was running through Central Park. I turned somewhere in the ramble and suddenly I was eye to eye with the biggest raccoon I had ever seen in my life. I screamed, "Oh my God," in English, just as surely as it shrieked something similar in raccoon. I was shocked by its sudden presence, but most of all, I just couldn't believe something so wild had grown, survived, and continued to thrive in the middle of Manhattan. This experience set me off on a mission to uncover all the amazing creatures hidden in plain sight in this seemingly unforgiving city. Along the way, I discovered stories of peril and perseverance, histories both notorious and sublime. The most surprising thing I discovered, however, is the vital role all these animals have played in New York City's history. Indeed, the city did not grow to such heights in spite of its surrounding nature, but rather rose to become the most famous metropolis in the world because of it. The city owes everything, its legacy and its strength, to the surrounding wild world. These critters are not some footnote or a historical aside to the saga that is New York City. Instead, these animals are the story, they are the city, and they always have been. You see, way back before the arrival of the Dutch, back when this was Lenape land, New York City was overflowing with wildlife, including black bears, gray wolves, and fish of countless stripes. Eric Sanderson, in his Mannahatta, maps out how this region might have looked 400 years ago, before the arrival of Henry Hudson, and posits that the city comprised then some 50 different ecological neighborhoods, providing a stunning array of habitats and biodiversity. In other words, it's not enough to say that had it been left untouched, New York City could have been a national park. Rather, it would have been the jewel of the national park system, on par with Yellowstone or Yosemite. But of course, the city went in the other direction, building up an urban landscape the likes of which the world had never seen before, a testament to humanity's ability to transform and yes, tame the natural world. To do so, it drew on its natural wealth, which was much more abundant than any other new American city on the eastern seaboard. Those other cities didn't stand a chance. Philadelphia has a port, sure, but it's about 80 miles inland. Boston has a port on the ocean, but it is in no way protected. And Washington, D.C., politics aside, is literally a swampy mess 100 miles from the ocean, where few people even lived before 1800. New York City, on the other hand, is surrounded by broad and navigable rivers, protected by a series of barrier islands, and sits only 7 nautical miles from the open ocean. You would be hard-pressed to create a more ideal natural setting for a harbor city if you tried. And things were even better on land, where there were fortunes to be made. According to American mythology, Europeans came to this continent and this city in search of freedom. And sure, perhaps some did, but money and dreams of wealth played a much larger role. After all, the East India Company of the Netherlands didn't finance a permanent New Amsterdam colony in Lower Manhattan just for the sake of liberty. The British didn't later wrestle that colony away from the Dutch and then make a strategic bid to hold it at all costs against the rebellious Americans just for the sake of freedom. Forget those patriotic fairy tales. Cash ruled everything around Manhattan. And even back in the day, New York City was a moneymaker. Now, early on, that meant beaver skins, as well as the pelts of otters, mink, and muskrats. Later, it was fish and oysters, more oysters than the world had ever seen. Eventually, that small original Dutch settlement at the tip of southern Manhattan spread out in every direction, including up. The landscape was totally remade, all in the name of profit and progress, in the name of America. There was so much to be had back then that the supply seemed endless. There was no sense in worrying for the future. Forbearance, prudence, conservation, forget about it. The trash could be burned, tossed into the wetlands, hauled out to sea, or better yet, dealt with later. Surely the good times of natural prosperity, free from want, consequence, and repercussion, would last forever. As the story goes, though, things went to shit. In some cases, literally. The harbor was overfished and simultaneously inundated with human waste. The forests were cut down, the streams were paved over, the beavers were trapped, replaced with litter in their river habitats should they ever consider returning. The air was poisoned, many birds were driven to the brink of extinction. The natural borders of the shoreline were pushed out until one constant bulkhead emerged, destroying countless habitats while leaving the city needlessly vulnerable to flooding. And the garbage was piled hundreds of feet high, higher than the Statue of Liberty, until finally the landscape was unsuitable for the natural world, barely any better for humans. Incredibly, in that relatively short period of 350 years between the arrival of the Dutch to the end of the 1960s, New York City, once an ecological and natural gem, the likes of which had never been seen before, was all but ruined. By the time landmark environmental regulations such as Clean Water Act of 1972 were enacted, a cross-species urban exodus was already underway. Indeed, it wasn't just the animals that were leaving. New York City's human population declined in the 1970s for the first and only time in its history, or at least as long as such records have been kept. Many refer to this period as the city's dark days, when those who could afford to do so left for the suburbs, and those who remained endured a diseased city, a bruised apple rotting to its core. Pollution and environmental degradation were only part of the story, but by no means did they play an insignificant role in this blighted chapter of New York history. Nobody wanted to live in this mess, not the people, and certainly not the animals. Wild City is a reminder of what happens when society doesn't consider how its actions play out downstream. These are the stories of those collisions between nature and our urban experiment. At times, this relationship has been misguided. Other times, it's been cruel. There have been quite a few surprises, plenty of unintended consequences. But this book is also a story of redemption, about a city once epitomized by blight and pollution that now towers above its peers as an example of balanced and sustainable urban living. Although it seemed like a long shot just a few decades ago, New York City actually has cleaned up its act, as well as its harbor, its river, and its parks. Real ecological amends have been made throughout years of hard-fought environmental crusades by advocates who had the nerve, grit, and vision to make the city a more hospitable place for all living creatures. Slowly yet steadily, many of the regional native species have returned, accompanied by many new species which are eager to try their hand or paw, feather or fin at city living. And here in New York City, of all places, they have found a greener, cleaner, and healthier place to live. As part of my research for this book, I paddled a canoe down the Bronx River in search of beavers, visited a hospital for pigeons on the Upper West Side, sought out parrots in a Brooklyn cemetery, tended honeybee hives on a Midtown roof, spotted peregrine falcons hunting above the East River, built artificial oyster beds on Governor's Island, witnessed endangered birds darting along a rehabilitated landfill in Staten Island, moved quietly through a coyote's overgrown habitat in Queens, and watched with wonder as whales crashed among the waves just off the city's shoreline. I soon came to realize the Central Park raccoon I encountered was no anomaly. It was a real New Yorker, and along with its presumed family and dozens of other critters, made up a crucial part of a wildly different New York City than I ever knew existed. And that's the city I hope to share here with you. Think of this book as a guide for curious nature-starved New Yorkers, hoping to spot the magic of urban wildlife, who must otherwise squeeze from tight subway car to tiny apartment, who feel beaten down by the grind of the rat race, who maybe forget from time to time why living in this city is such a thrilling experience. Hopefully these stories of enterprising and wild animals that endeavor to make it here will be a testament to all creatures' ability to thrive in the big city. Though it may be cramped and crowded, life does prevail here in New York City. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Tom.
Thank you.
I love the introduction to the book. It really situates the animals in the city as kind of like built by the environment as much as humans are. So the animals you know, the idea that they're sorry. I wanted to start by saying that we could discuss the animals that are most common in New York City, that most people are familiar with, that engage with the built environment. Absolutely. So those animals happen to be some of my favorite and least favorite. As we were discussing before, we could start with my least favorite if you like, sure. Which is cutely illustrated here. They are not as cute in real life, unfortunately.
I actually find this this one terrifying. In a like, it's very scary to me. And I take this opportunity to shout out the book's illustrator, Kath Nash, who I was so lucky to work with. And this is a creation of her mind and imagination here. She did something like 45 full-page illustrations for the book, and maybe half of them I said, here's a photograph, just basically illustrate this photograph. And on the other half, I said, I have no idea. And this is one I had no idea. And it's cute, but it's very terrifying to think that when you turn up the light, a roach could be running by your toothbrush. And the other thing that I really like that she did here is the rubber ducky. It's sure another animal, but it also implies, and so does the small toothbrush, it implies a child is living in this bathroom. And one of the things that I wanted to get across in the roach chapter is the real negative effect roaches and roach infestations can have on people's health, especially young people's health, from a respiratory point of view. And some of the going into this project, you can't write a book about New York City wildlife and not include roaches. It would just be disingenuous to do that, and there are a lot of like punchlines and jokes about roaches being everywhere, but my research led me to see that roaches are actually more predominant in lower income neighborhoods, and those same neighborhoods have the highest incidence of asthma and the highest the lowest life expectancy. And it's I don't think it's a coincidence, and it's an unfortunate thing that this is one of those collisions between our built environment and the natural world, and it's not a funny thing. They really are a real pest. They really are. And I know we'll get into the other ones, and I think we have a little bit of a, between the two of us, we have a fair review of the next two, but I think this one we're pretty much aligned are just terrible.
They are terrible. Yeah. At the Tenement Museum, I'm the collections manager, so I care for the preservation of the objects, and part of that involves integrated pest management. So unfortunately, these little guys, these American cockroaches, and I are very familiar with each other, as much as I would like them to go away forever.
Yeah, so. Yeah, and I think I asked the cockroach source that I spoke to, I said, how could you? And he was like, it was like an impossible question about how New York City could get rid of cockroaches. And I think it's important to recognize that, that if we did, these are not native species. I like to say that the cockroaches rather have adapted to live in apartment buildings just like we have. Like, they're doing kind of the same thing we are. And but they're filling a niche. And so if they were to somehow, and it's a big, impossible, hypothetical somehow, be eradicated, it's likely that some other pest that we would equally hate, and maybe even more hate, would take its place. So it's kind of the devil, I guess. I don't really know what we do about roaches in New York City.
I don't think I want to know the other devil. The devil we don't know. So the next animal that's featured is one, this illustration is beyond adorable.
Very cute. Yeah.
And you go into your book, what I found so interesting was that pizza rat, as well as selfie rat, you kind of infer that they could have potentially been trained rats as part of like a hoax or a stunt.
Yeah. There's like an Instagram artist. I think she's had actual physical exhibits as well. Her name is Zardulu, Zardulu, and it was uncovered in some podcast like 5 years ago. Like right after Pizza Rat came out, this woman took credit for it, and it kind of makes sense. Like, why would a rat drag a perfectly intact slice of an iconic New York City piece of pizza down a flight of stairs? Now, but what I would say is that it's actually maybe even more incredible that you could train a rat to do that. And I think it is a funny thing that happened. And if it's not serendipitous, if it's not naturally occurring, it's still kind of remarkable and impressive that an animal can be trained to do that and to take a selfie. I think there was peanut butter on the screen or something. I mean, it was kind of a actually unbelievable story, but still pretty, I think it counts as a positive in the rat's ledger, I think, but yeah.
I think I'd put it on his resume. He carried pizza.
Yeah, I'm Pizza Rat. I don't like to make a big deal out of it. You may have heard of me.
I'm a photographer. Fortunately, we don't have many of these at the Tenement Museum. They're certainly in the neighborhood, but we don't have them in our buildings yet. One thing we do have are what people like to refer to as flying rats, which I would take as a compliment.
Yeah, you would, yeah.
I would take it as a compliment. But the lovely pigeon.
So I have become, I guess, like radicalized on this issue. Like I'm not like passive. I am someone who will interrupt the neighboring conversation about pigeons and then I won't actually do that. But I've become a huge fan of the pigeon. And I think what's really so interesting about them is that they were really a very crucial animal in civilization from ancient Egypt up through the 1890s in Belgium. The original Reuters was pigeons flying stock tips across Belgium. And then we found chicken farming, and we found wireless communication and industrial fertilizer, and all the things that pigeons once provided for people found other sources. And so now they're just around and we all detest them. But they have really unique intelligence and really unique athleticism that I think makes them worth a second look. And what I really love about what I've discovered with the New York City pigeons is the work being done by the Wild Bird Fund on the Upper West Side. Just the nicest, kindest people, and it's just such a refreshing thing to know that there are people out there taking care of these maligned creatures. And when I went and spoke to Rita McMahon, who's the director and co-founder of the Wild Bird Fund, she ran through her statistics for me, which are in the thousands of birds a year, and half of the birds they bring in are pigeons. And we quickly divided that number by 365, and we discovered that something like 8 or 9 times a day, someone brings an injured pigeon into the hospital, the pigeon hospital, into the Wild Bird Fund. And as I was standing there with her, a guy walks in with a Uniqlo bag and it's flapping. The inside of the bag is sort of, there's something in there. And it happens. And if you follow them on Twitter, which I highly recommend, Twitter can, I think we all know, can cause some anxiety with the news, and you don't want to be on it too long. But the antidote for that within the app is the Wild Bird Fund's account, because you see all these people saying, I found an injured baby robin, what do I do? And then the Wild Bird Fund tweets it out, and then someone comes and gets the robin and brings it in, and they show you the recovery, and they show you the birds getting released back into Central Park. And it's really this beautiful, beautiful thing that happens. And on Twitter, of all terrible places. So it's a recommended follow for sure.
It makes sense, Twitter with the Wild Bird Fund.
Right, tweet, exactly.
I have been tweeting. Right. I happen to follow them on Instagram, and I learned something really incredible, which I didn't know about pigeons, but the way that they walk, they kind of shuffle their feet, and it causes a lot of problems where their feet get tangled up in wires and hairs. Yeah, and so one of the most common pigeon injuries are foot injuries.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And you can kind of see it sometimes. If you see a pigeon out there, they got some kind of mangled legs sometimes, but they really are incredible birds. They can fly, hundreds of miles to home to a place that from a place they've never been before. Nobody really understands how their homing ability works. They can recognize the alphabet and recognize pattern. I think B.F. Skinner, who is, a separate conversation. Yeah, he taught them to play ping pong and things like that. I mean, he really, that's a separate conversation. But yes, they are incredible animals. And I think what's really great about rats and pigeons, though they may disagree, is that they provide this food source for these other majestic animals that we all love. There are more peregrine falcons in New York City than anywhere else in the world. They were very, very drastically close to being extinct just 50 years ago. And now they're here eating to their heart's content because of the pigeons. So,
I thought we had the hawks up here, but that I also learned that from the Wild Bird Fund too. I was really amazed at how our attempts at reducing rat populations by using rat poison just travels up the food chain. Absolutely. And it ends up poisoning all of these animals. Like you were writing about how Pale Male, the most famous red-tailed hawk, one of his wives was poisoned from rat poison.
I think it happens a lot too, and that the book from the 50s or 60s, Silent Spring by Rachel Carson. I mean, this was the point that she made, that we want to control, we want to get such productive yield agriculturally. So we'll decide we want to kill off this one part of the ecosystem, but it doesn't work that way. And you said it perfectly. It works its way up the food chain, and it's a real problem. And that happens with these striped bass too, actually. Most called a segue, I guess. But what was the problem here was General Electric up on the Hudson River. I like to say that when I wrote this book, I was only positive about every organization that I talked about except for General Electric, because it's just kind of not a great thing what happened. But so General Electric was dumping PCBs into the Hudson River up by Poughkeepsie or Fishkill, around there. And yeah, right, appropriately named. And Sports Illustrated broke the story, and it's of course terrible what happened, but the silver lining of that is that that really ushered in the EPA, the Clean Water Act, Clean Air Act. So, it's not great, but what we're seeing with the striped bass is that they have absorbed a lot of those PCBs. But they kind, it's an interesting thing that's happened with them because it's reduced their allowable catch. So poisoning the populations in this roundabout way has actually been good for their numbers, because you can't catch as many. I don't really know how that'll net out over time, but it seems to be some positive impact in that otherwise reckless poisoning. But what's also really interesting is that this is not some far corner of New York City. I mean, this is outside the United Nations. This is outside the Statue of Liberty. This is outside the West Side Highway. It's because it's underwater, we don't see it, but it's one of the more impressive animal migrations anywhere in the world, is the running of the striped bass. But you fishermen know it, fishermen and women know it, but you wouldn't see it out in the open. It's happening underneath the water, so you have no idea. But it's really kind of incredible what's happening here. I think twice a year. The running of the striped bass. It's just amazing.
I had no idea about that too. Like, I knew about them in the Sound. I was more familiar with them kind of farther out east, but I had no idea that they're swimming right up the river. Yeah.
No, it's really incredible. I think I caught a bluefish, but I've fished right outside, like East 25th Street, like right there. You can really catch. It's interesting because they recommend not eating too much, but if you're living paycheck to paycheck, that's catch it yourself protein. That's free catch it yourself protein. So it becomes this balancing act between, I don't want to get PCBs, but I also don't want to starve to death. So I can understand why people are out there casting a line.
Definitely. And a historic example of that too would be the free protein that oysters provided, that I think people gathered way too much for them. So
Yes. Oh, well, this is, I mean, I think there are a few animals in the book that are really, I mean, there are a lot, I love everyone, but there's some that are truly foundational to the history of New York. And I think that oysters is one of a handful that is truly, truly like, it's not, you know, as Mark Kurlansky said, it's not the big apple, it's the big oyster. I mean, it really is one of the animals that built this city. And it wasn't just that people were over harvesting, though they definitely were, but we were dumping all of our raw sewage into the water. So Typhoid Mary and you know, all of those cholera outbreaks were caused by our poor sanitation, and it's really kind of staggering to think about the history of oysters in New York City, because you really can tell the whole history of New York through that one animal. And for anyone who hasn't read Mark Kurlansky's book, I can't recommend it highly enough. You know, there's by some estimations, half of the world's oysters were in New York Harbor before the Europeans arrived. And one funny anecdote, one disgusting kind of to think about anecdote, depends if you like oysters or not. The Gowanus Canal, when it was the Gowanus Creek, was like a perfect habitat for oysters, and they would grow to the size of dinner plates, which is, I mean, if you don't like oysters or the Gowanus Canal, then you probably wouldn't like to visualize that. But we did overharvest, and we did, it was two-pronged. You know, we were like, you know, this literally went to shit. And it is a tough story, but happily and luckily for New York, it doesn't end there. And in Mark Kurlansky's book, it kind of does end there. It was like, well, what do we do? But there's this incredible, great organization called the Billion Oyster Project, and they're aligned with the New York Harbor School, which is a vocational high school on Governor's Island. And as their name suggests, they hope to get 1 billion oysters back into the harbor. And they're up to some number like 30 million, which is a lot. And it's not just that they've implanted 30 million oysters in and around New York City Harbor. It's that those then regenerate on top of, you know, they grow, they kind of set it and forget it. And they're not going to be on menus anytime soon, probably not in our lifetimes, but the value and the work that they're doing under the water for New York is incredible. They're one oyster can clean 50 gallons of water every day. And that's where they got the 1 billion oysters from. It's this back of the envelope math saying, all right, if you put 1 billion oysters in the harbor, every 3 days, the oysters will clean the harbor. It's incredible. And not only that, they attenuate storm surges. So if oysters had been where they were naturally, Hurricane Sandy would have had, by some estimates, a lot less of an impact. And then they're also they build habitats for other species. So crabs and other things really are drawn to oyster gabions and things like that. They're really a super important story. And the Billion Oyster Project, again, is just one of dozens of these great organizations that are out there doing amazing work for New York City and New Yorkers. And it is a happier ending to the story than we had just 15 or 20 years ago. It really is on a more optimistic trajectory, you know, thank God. So.
And you mentioned something very interesting too about the shoreline. And while you were reading the introduction, I put this map up, which is also so shocking. But to think of the area all around as marshland, like this giant sponge that was absorbing any tidal swell, it really, when you look at this image, you could see why Hurricane Sandy had such an impact.
Yeah, there's some line about Hurricane Sandy that it didn't flood, it reclaimed. Like it wasn't, you know, it was sort of taking back what was the oceans. And I think there's 25%, Manhattan has grown by 25%, and New York Harbor has 3 Manhattans worth of new land in it. And that changes all the water flow. I mean, that changes everything. There's some there's some anecdote that you could walk from Brooklyn near Red Hook or Cobble Hill, Carroll Gardens, you could walk to Governor's Island at low tide. You couldn't do that in a million years. I mean, you could barely swim it across the Buttermilk Channel. But, you know, it's bad. I mean, bad for biodiversity in 1650, 1800. I mean, that's like, no one will know what you're talking about. I mean, I use the Wu-Tang reference in the book because they are New Yorkers, but it was true. I mean, cash rules. I mean, that's like, that was the point. And there were some prospectors who would, buy a bit of the harbor knowing that it would get filled in. And that's why we have things like Water Street and things like that. One of my favorite, and we'll move on from this because I can talk about any one of these topics forever, but one of the oldest bars in New York City is on Spring Street, and it's called the Ear Inn. And there's a cleat outside the door because that was the shore.
Wow.
When that was built. And you walk by and you wouldn't know, but you're looking at it and you say, why would there be a cleat here? The river is a quarter mile away. Well, it wasn't always.
Wow.
Yeah.
You also, in the book, you mentioned quite a lot of places that have rivers running underneath the building or in the basement. Yeah. And this idea of like kind of a secret underground world that's not like, subway people living in the subway or or the alligator in the sewer, which we'll get to soon. Yeah. But like there truly is this underground secret world that's natural in New York City.
Well, I guess one of it's the issue of hydrology, like where water wants to go was really interesting to me. And because I think when you get into it, you have all these, if you look into the history of New York, there was a 50-acre pond where City Hall is. There was a river running from Flatiron out through Tribeca, the Minetta Brook. And I came to realize, I never really thought about rivers. I just, like, I don't know where I guess I could think about where they start, but really what I kind of came to realize is that rivers are just, they're just topography and weather, and you can't turn them off. Water goes where it wants to go. And that's something that the Gowanus Canal Conservancy is dealing with now. But yeah, the Minetta Brook, you can go on these walking tours with this guy, Steve Duncan, and he'll pop open a manhole and you'll see the river running underneath it. And I had one quote that we took out when I was talking about the Minetta Brook in the Where the Wild Things Were chapter. And I went into the Minetta Tavern and kind of like brought the bartender in. I was like, is there a river underneath this? And he was like, absolutely. He's like, we don't talk about it, but like every building on this block gets flooded when it rains. And he's like, there's absolutely a river that runs underneath here. And the exciting thing that there's probably not much they can do about that in Manhattan, or maybe not, but in the Bronx, there's some, and in other places, there's some real opportunities to daylight these rivers. And it's a great opportunity for the environment, for park equity, for a number of reasons, but just, I will move on. But the one in the Bronx, it's the Tibbetts Brook, and it runs in, it's a river that comes in from Yonkers, runs through Van Cortlandt Park, and then it goes in a sewer for no reason. And it's something like 5 million gallons a day that's being treated at a wastewater plant in Ward's Island. And the thing is, every little bit of water that's not being treated in the sewers helps. So if you take those 5 million gallons out of the water, that's 5 million gallons. It's not going to overflow. And that's the dirty secret about New York, is every time it rains, our sewage goes out into the water. So all the fish and all the oysters and all the whales, they would benefit from us daylighting these rivers. And then we'd have new rivers where we could put parks alongside. I mean, it's kind of a no-brainer as far as this one wildlife writer is concerned, but I think there's probably more to it, but that's my opinion.
Yeah, and I didn't include the photo. I mean, there's so many great illustrations and so many great animal stories in the book, and I didn't include the beaver story, but that truly is all about rivers, particularly in the Bronx. Yeah. And beavers were the first engineers, and they manipulated the rivers as well, but not as the master engineers of New York City have done.
Yeah, and the beavers are another one of these, like the oysters. I mean, it's the whole history of New York can kind of be told on the back of a beaver. I didn't realize that there are 2 beavers on the New York City flag. The City College mascot is a beaver. I think it's the only animal mascot in New York City. Beaver Street, there's all those beavers on Astor Place subway station. But it was a bad story. I mean, we had all of these beavers. It's the reason the New Amsterdam colony was was settled, or, you know, I mean, that was the reason the East India Company set up a settlement here. And by 1800, they were gone. And then in 2008, after the Bronx River Alliance, which is, you know, analogous to the Billion Oyster Project, analogous to the Wild Bird Fund, another one of these incredible organizations, spent 30 years cleaning up that river. And they're still working they're still taking volunteers probably next weekend. And the vindication was that in 2008, they started seeing beavers again. And I will just quickly plug the Bronx River Alliance one more time, that when, you know, things return to normal, hopefully, or whatever semblance of that is, take them up on their canoe tours down the Bronx River, because it is the most eye-opening experience, and it's probably the most fun thing I've ever done in New York City. It's really, you wouldn't believe it. It's really great. And they're a great organization.
After reading your book, I have a list of like fun activities. One of them is the American Princess whale watching.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So right here. Yeah. So American Princess, we have whale watching tours and seal watching tours. And then you can unintentionally almost always see dolphins and sharks on their tours as well. They have 100% success rate with seals, because they just have this one island. But whales, we went out there 4 or 5 years ago and we saw 2 or 3 humpback whales. I mean, it's unbelievable. And, you know, I don't want to make this point too much, but, you know, the environmental regulations of the 1970s and the continued regulations, as you know, watered down as they are at times, are why we have this resurgence in wildlife. It's not a happy accident. I mean, this is a real cause and effect. And with regards to the whales, they eat these fish called menhaden, which you would never see on a menu. They're in fish oil supplements. That's the fish. And the Atlantic Fisheries Commission put in a reduction, like a 25% reduction in allowable catch. 2 years later, there were whales in New York City. I mean, it was overnight. Now, someone will say to you that's bad for business. Well, maybe, but I don't know that a bad environment is good for business, and I don't think that fishing out all the fish so that you can't fish next year is good for business either. I think you're actually probably helping your business by having a little bit of reduction and regulation. It's a separate Zoom call. But the whales, what's incredible about this illustration, which is probably my favorite, but I would say that about half of them, is that typically they're found out on the other side of the Verrazano Narrows, so in the lower harbor, which is definitely still in New York City, and they're out a little bit farther than that. But this is from a photograph that Kath Nash has obviously made way more beautiful, where they will go up the Hudson River. And this one was up the Hudson River around the George Washington Bridge. This was in 2016. And in that same year, I don't know if it was the same whale, went up the east side to Gracie Mansion, so around 80th Street. And what's incredible to me about that one is, you could have been standing on the Brooklyn Bridge and seen a whale go by. You probably wouldn't have believed it. You probably wouldn't even know what you were looking at, but I mean, you might have, it had to have come up for air when it was near the Brooklyn Bridge, and also I love to think that someone was taking the F train underneath the East River from Queens to Manhattan with a whale above their head. I mean, that was what I wanted the illustration for this to be, but it was too complicated. I was like, they're sitting there and they're reading and there's a whale, and they're like, let's not over egg the pudding. But yeah, no, and to me, I grew up near Long Island Sound in the suburbs, and I just never thought I'd ever see a whale. I just thought we didn't take care of the environment, and just like was a thing that happened out in like Vancouver or like out in the wilderness. And when they started coming back, it was really, I think there's no better vindication than the humpback whales. I mean, they're just so incredible. And they also have like a language and song. I mean, I have a page in the back about further reading, and there's like a whole book about whale song and the cultural lives of whales and dolphins, and it's just like completely heady, incredible stuff. So I recommend that, obviously.
I will put that also on my list. Speaking of lists, we actually have a question from the audience, and the question is there a list of environmental groups we could visit or support when we're able to visit New York City again?
I could make that list. I would recommend Gotham Whale. I would recommend the Wild Bird Fund, Bronx River Alliance, Billion Oyster Project. I don't mean to be such a shill, but I mean, if they're in here and they're not General Electric, then I think you should support them. That's, that's basically, if you just choose an animal, there's probably an advocacy group associated with them. There's even like this out in Riverhead, Long Island, there's this like turtle hospital that helps endangered sea turtles, and they have like a turtle ambulance, and they're just the thing. I mean, I'm not really answering the question, I'm sorry, but I will get back to that person. But what's really just so nice that I came to discover in writing this book is that if you can think of an animal, there's some New Yorker out there really being an advocate for them, right down to Canada geese, which the guy who's the goose advocate is the nicest guy, but I'm like, who cares about geese? He's like, I do. I care about Canada geese. And so it's kind of a nice reassuring you know, a side note of this book is that there are really great people in New York who are doing really good work. So,
and I don't want to make too abrupt of a transition, but our next animal is actually one of those animals that the history of it is a history of our interventions and then animal welfare considerations. It also deals with waste removal, which we bring up a lot, which you brought up a lot in the book. And I just find like the history of horses in New York City, and particularly kind of like the rules and the regulations and the laws around horses and the next domesticated animals we're going to bring up, is really fascinating to me.
Yeah, I mean, horses, I think that at one point in the 1800s, there were more horses in New York City than there were people in Pittsburgh. I mean, it was, and their life expectancy was about half, and you know, they were literally worked to death, and they were, you know, shitting in the streets everywhere they went, and nobody cared about any of that stuff back then. And there's some suggestion in some architectural circles that the stoop is a response to there being like horse shit in the street. Now the stoop is also a response to Dutch flooding, but with, you know, that's another thing. But there was a worry before the automobile was invented that the city would be overrun with horse shit, that it would be 6 feet high if it continued unabated. And then, of course, the car was invented, and it just wasn't a problem anymore. It's a host of other problems, but that wasn't a problem anymore. But the other problem that the horses did usher in was that they were dying. And when they died, if they weren't left to die in the streets, which a lot of them were, and we're talking like 5,000, 10,000 dead horses a year, they were shipped out to this place called Barren Island, which is now Floyd Bennett Field, and it is no longer an island. And there's a shore of the former Barren Island called Dead Horse Bay, and I like to joke that it's not a family name. It's a descriptor, and you can go there, and it's also, this gets into the whole Robert Moses, which is unavoidable in any discussion of New York City. But Robert Moses basically connected Barren Island to southern Brooklyn with landfill, which was good because he could, well, in his mind, it was good. He could do something with trash. You know, New York was always wondering what to do with their trash. That comes up all the time. And he had now land that wasn't a horse rendering plant, because that was, you know, now with the automobile, we didn't need to render horses anymore at Dead Horse Bay. And at some point, about 4 or 5 years after the landfill was capped, it burst open. And if you go to Dead Horse Bay now, you will see like china cups and like, you know, like little like pieces of household trash, and also horse bones. And it's this very bizarre relic of this period in New York City, which we're still kind of dealing with. And if you go to Central Park and see the stables on the west side. I mean, there's people on both sides of that argument who are very, and that's one I decided not to wade into, honestly.
You're not touching the carriage horses.
I have a lot of family, first generation from Ireland here, a lot of cousins, and they have an opinion on it. And I'm like, this is just a different book.
Well, I'm a former National Park Service employee, and where Dead Horse Bay is actually on the Jamaica Wildlife Preserve. Right. Or Jamaica Wildlife Refuge. And what's interesting is that they consider all of that trash as part of the cultural resources. Right. So it's illegal to pick up and go there and pick up the bones or pick up pieces of glass, and that's part of the story of the bay. It's
so funny. I mean, I'm so glad you brought that up. And I love Gateway and Jamaica Bay and all that. It's such a gift to New York City that but you're so right, and people do. I don't mean to narc anybody out, but people do.
I know they
do. But I remember shortly after I went to Dead Horse Bay, my wife and I were in Colorado at Mesa Verde, and like when you're there at like what feels like a really historical site, you would never dream of taking what could have been someone's trash, but what's the difference? Like legally, what's the difference between Mesa Verde and Dead Horse Bay? Mm-hmm. Nothing, right? I mean, they're both national under the NPS. So yeah, no, it's funny. It's like, don't pick up the garbage.
Right.
How dare you? Like, how dare you? You're like, but it's a national park. You're like, yeah, but it's an artifact. Yeah.
It's owned by the American people,
right.
And if you pick it up, you're stealing from the American people.
Right.
So
that's right.
Even if you are an American person. This actually, I mean, this really dovetails also with the pigs in Times Square, which is another thing that I learned from the book. But when we're talking about like parks and park equity and Pigtown, this story just really hit the nail on the head for me for this moment that we're in right now.
Yeah, so what I think was so interesting so Pigtown was basically, let's call it Central Park South to Times Square, like 6th Avenue to the river, or to the Hudson River, let's broadly call it that. And it was more than that. But, New York City, if we think about it, it really moves north to south, right? You have the Dutch settlement at the bottom of the island. And then, there's this anecdote about City Hall. When it was built, they decided to use cheap materials on the north side because no one would ever be on the north side of City Hall. And now you think about that and you're like, the whole city is north of City Hall. Anyway, we kept going north and north, and Pigtown was a less than desirable enterprise. It smelled terrible. These recently arrived peasant Irish farmers, like my great grandparents, and like they were like, this is how they made their food. And pigs really made sense for a poor family, and a lot of the ways that the oyster made sense for a poor family, a lot of the ways that the striped bass makes sense for a poor family today. This was a thing that you could. This is a smart creature. You could let it out in the beginning of the day. It would go feed itself, come home, and then whenever it was time, you had protein, or you could sell it. I mean, it was kind of a great thing to have. But as the city continued to grow, they also, concurrent with this, realized they needed to have like a greens ward, like a lungs for the city, a central park. So when Central Park opened, there was all this development till nice people development up until around the 30s. Then north of that, you had Hogtown. And then north of that, you had Central Park. So when people wanted to visit Central Park, they had to go through Pigtown. And it was really these like well-to-do downtown people who were like, I don't want to ride the trolley to go to Central Park through these disgusting pigs. So NYPD and sent out eviction notice, and the Irish pig farmers were saying, come and get my pigs. I dare you to do it. And then there's like all these not great, but there's all these New York Times articles where they're kind of being, it's pretty anti-Irish, and that's the story of New York, right? I mean, it's like immigrant classes are constantly, being treated poorly when they get here. And, of course, because it's New York City, like pig farmers lost out to development. I mean, cash rules, right? So, but what I think is so interesting about this is that it was really like it was one of the last vestiges of Manhattan being close to the fundamentals of our life. So food production is now moved out of sight. And now, you know, we just turn on a faucet and our water comes magically. You just throw your trash in the trash chute, it goes away magically. Like, we don't really have to think about that. And that is sort of a basic tenet of urban living all over the place. But when the pig farmers were evicted in what the New York, I think was called the Great Piggery War of 1859, it was really like a gentrification act, and you know, this city improvement thing. But it also was this other, you know, nail in the coffin of New York City really living off of its own land, which couldn't, you know, you couldn't sustain for long. But now we have, you know, people growing honey and tending bees on their roofs. We have rooftop farms like Brooklyn Grange. So you know, it does.
We have sheep mowing cemeteries next to a church.
That's right. The original maintenance department for the parks. Yeah, these were the Robert Moses gets involved here too, because when Central Park was built, they had a herd of sheep that cleaned the Great Lawn, and Prospect Park had a herd as well. And then I think around the Great Depression, they merged the herds into Prospect Park, and then they just kind of disappeared. And like, it's like kind of unclear like what happened to them. But one of the fears is that hungry Brooklynites would take them, because it was the Depression. And one thing that's, this illustration here are 3 sheep that come down from upstate New York around now, actually, around the Feast of San Gennaro. So like, you know, a couple of weeks from now. And they go to the old St. Patrick's Cathedral in Soho. And I'm walking through Soho one day, getting to the library to do some work on this book. And I see this sign that says like, you know, bring back our sheep, or like, there are sheep here, be quiet. And I'm thinking, this is what I'm looking. What do you mean there's sheep here? And so I literally stumbled into this story. And you know, it's this kind of, you know, I don't know that it's a gimmick, because they're basically doing the same thing sheep were doing for New York City before the war. You know, they're tending in smaller numbers on a smaller patch of grass. But it's pretty, what I also really like is that there are goats that now work up in Riverside Park. And, you know, I think there are a lot of these natural, low cost solutions that are available to us. And they also have this nice pastoral, you know, aesthetic of value to them too. But, you know, they're also really doing the job, you know?
And we have another question from the audience, which kind of really works great with this conversation we're having. And it's, how can understanding the intertwined history of animals and humans in New York City shape local conservation or environmental efforts?
Well, that's a great question. And I think you should read the book. No, I think what's important to know is that the rise of New York City and its environmental wealth, its environmental richness, are not isolated. New York City is a big bad city because we have all of this great wildlife. We had all these oysters, we had all these beavers. And I think that framing it as good for business and framing it as good for New York City, and not like a thing you should do, it's a thing you want to do. You don't want the air so bad that it's giving kids asthma. You don't want the water poisoned. You don't want the shoreline flooding. And there's this great guy who I talked to for the book in the Red Tail Hawk chapter, but he really informed a lot of what I learned. His name's Gabriel Willow, and he does walking tours and bird tours, and he's just another great follow. But what he said to me, and I put this in the last page of the book, when you examine what's good for wildlife and what's good for people, 9 out of 10 times they're the same thing. Like, be selfish about it. And I think it's important. It's not like it's in our selfish interest actually to take care of the environment. And I you know, again, I could really dive into a lot of these topics, so I'll move on. But Michael Bloomberg's book that he wrote with Carl Pope, who founded the Sierra Club, I think really illustrates that there doesn't need to be a difference between business interests and environmental interests, and that they actually do really work hand in glove. When you think about the money that we have to spend cleaning up the Gowanus Canal, when you think about the money and the quality of life of children with asthma and flooding and all of these things that, you know, we could avoid with prevention rather than paying for with cure, I think.
Mm-hmm. Well, this is kind of, I mean, we're going from a topic that's like about a lot of advocacy to the alligator in the sewer, but there is this element here of business and the environment and animals coming together, and people making a profit off animals or making a profit off them to the detriment of the health of animals and scaring the city.
That's right. Yeah. So this was actually the first story that I guess like investigated or thought about writing about. My parents and grandparents and my whole family before being from Ireland are from Brooklyn, and I would hear these stories about sewer alligators, and I thought just my parents were telling me that, and it turns out that you know, you go out into the world and you're like, oh yeah, I heard that too, and you see that The Simpsons are making a joke about it, and it's in Thomas Pynchon's debut novel, and it's kind of everywhere when you start looking for it, and it's because it really happened, and it was this, and there are sewer alligator advocates, I will say. There are quite a few. There's a guy who was his name was Michael Moscone, and he was until very recently, the Manhattan borough historian, and he successfully petitioned, I believe it's February 10th, as Alligators in the Sewer Day, because that's a day in 1935, I think, or 1932, where like a 7-foot alligator was pulled out of an East Harlem manhole cover, and it was an article in the Times. I mean, it wasn't like a rumor. I mean, you can read it on NewYorkTimes.com tonight, you know, he would tell you that you could buy an alligator, you can mail away for one for $1.50. And I do think it speaks to people's not really considering these things grow up, and not really considering, I mean, people have done this with ducklings. I mean, there's a whole, and people do it with dogs, quite honestly, you know, I mean, people get dogs because they see them in the window, which is like not how, I mean, that's a whole other conversation. But I think that we have a lot of examples of pets that are not really thought through. There's a huge cat problem in New York City, and it's a problem for the cats. You know, it's not good for the cats. Cats don't really do well outside. But this was definitely like the granddaddy of that. And I just think it's kind of cool, just personally, that there could be sewer. I just think I love New York City, like a lot, obviously. And I just love that, you know, watch out. You know, like it's not like, it's always exciting. Like there could be an alligator underneath you right now. And I will just say one thing. It's like, it's easy to dismiss, but these things have existed for tens of millions of years, you know, like they're pretty adaptable. Like we're not actually that adaptable. Like we're kind of recent. And these were, I think, contemporary with some dinosaurs. So it's hard to say that they couldn't adapt to living down there, because they have adapted to lots of things. So who knows?
There's some interesting parallels between alligators in the sewer and cockroaches in the sewer, or cockroaches underground, because without the heat of the built environment and without, you know, the conditions that kind of shelter them from the harsh winter, they probably wouldn't be able to survive. Yeah,
and that's the rumor. The whole legend says that, you know, it's like they got flushed down the toilet when they were babies, or, you know, it's like you get a baby alligator and then your parents are like, I can't, what are we doing? Flush it down the toilet. So that's how it got to the sewer. And then the legend says, then they'll eat the rats, you know? And so it's another thing. It's like, it's this built environment kind of feeding itself. So.
Right.
Yeah.
And our last example too is another country allegedly sending their unwanted species to America and trying to market them as pets.
Right, kind of successfully did so. Yeah. There's a great parrot guy, because there's a guy or a gal for every one of these animals. Steve Baldwin runs these parrot tours at Greenwood Cemetery, and as he told me, and I think there's some veracity to this. I think there's some like backing this up, that the Argentinian government saw these as pests, which is also kind of funny from like a perspective. Like, we walk through New York City with these ho-hum pigeons and starlings and things, and you know, and then you see this bright green bird. It's exotic, you know, because you know, you're not familiar with it. It hasn't been here. It's not relative to what you usually see. But in Argentina, it's like, get these goddamn parrots out of here. And they tried a bounty. They just couldn't kill enough, and people would send in like feet to prove that they had killed them, and then you get like a nickel back. I mean, which is also what our government did with the bison. Yeah. And so they successfully marketed them as pets, and I guess that just, you know, blew up and or took flight, I should say. And and then apparently a crate was opened at JFK. Somebody was trying to see what was in it, and all these hundreds of birds flew out, and they flew to Rikers Island, and they were going to be killed. And because USDA was like, this is an invasive species, which is true, you know, and I understand that perspective, that you don't want to introduce something if you can avoid it. But now it's like too late. And what I love is that they're given a new lease on life at a graveyard, you know, and it's good for the graveyard too, or the cemetery, I should say. Greenwood Cemetery, people who don't live in New York think I'm crazy when I'm like, oh, I'm going to go to the cemetery. So they're like, what are you, goth? Like, what are you doing? I'm like, no. I mean, yes, but no. It's such a beautiful place, and the parrots are what drew me in. I had been living in Brooklyn, and I'd never been to Greenwood Cemetery, and now it is really a real gem of New York City, and the parrots are just one of many reasons to go there, for sure.
The museum has a very close relationship with Greenwood Cemetery. The person who built the museum, Louis Glockner, you know, he built the Tenement building. He is buried in Greenwood, and one of our educator staffs just did a four-part blog post about his search for finding Mr. Glockner's grave. So it's quite, he's a good writer. So if anyone's interested in that, viewers, you should check out his post, because he really goes into how hard it was to try to find Glockner's grave in Greenwood. Yeah, I mean,
they used to call it necropolis. It was like a death city. I mean, and it's so interesting to think. I mean, it's another one of these like urban environment conundrums. I mean, you have people living in closer quarters than they really ever had before in the 1800s in New York City. What do you do with the dead, you know? And what was so interesting too is that Greenwood Cemetery really predates Central Park and Prospect Park, and they build this graveyard, this cemetery, and people start having picnics there because it's so pretty. Like, they don't care; they just are dying for open space. And, and Central Park and Prospect Park, you know, I mean, I think it's kind of fair to say that part of the impetus to build both of those was because of I don't know if it was unexpected success of Greenwood, but because of the success of Greenwood. Greenwood was the second most popular tourist destination in the country up until the Civil War. Yeah, just second to Niagara Falls, which is crazy, but yeah. And it's worth a visit.
Yeah, it is worth a visit. They have excellent twilight tours. So for our viewers who haven't had enough on their list of activities to do post-COVID, during the pandemic, I hope we've developed a large list of activities for people to look forward to.
Yeah, same here. Yeah.
All right, so it doesn't look like we have any additional questions. Tom, it's been wonderful. Thank you.
This has been great. This just flew. I just looked at my watch. I can't believe it.
Me neither.
I mean, it's really great. Thank you so much.
Talk about animals forever. For those of you that are interested, I'll do a final plug. Wild City, fantastic book. And if you want to read about the beavers and the bees and all of the animals we didn't mention, please pick it up. Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me and all the great work you guys do. It was a real honor to be here tonight. Thank you so much.
Thanks.